Alright, now we're on our next section. We have two more left. You have the Renaissance, and it's broken down into two other artists. Two artists per each section. So 4 artists total for that section. You're getting down to the end, so now we have women artists. Now, the reason I focus a whole section on women art, it's because your book only has about 25%, I'd say that might even be a little high, of women artists in the whole book. So if you do get the Living with Art, I've never really physically counted how many women are in there, but I'm sure there's not very many. So I really kind of dedicate this one little section just to women artists. Now, I'm only just kind of getting a handful that I believe need more information than the book gives, or even giving more information on how important they really are. And then some of them are just my favorite. Most of my favorite artists are women. And just the whole idea about the whole women's movement for the art. Now, I have We Can Do It, kind of an image, so to speak. So I put this in there. Now, this is done by a man, by the way, not a woman, which I find really kind of funny, especially for the women's movement. Now, when you look at this whole idea of women and the art movement, what year do you think that their voice started to be heard? When do you think they took a stand? Now, I usually give that statement to a class, and I can't hear your responses, but generally I hear the responses are around, they're like, the 1950s or 60s. Sometimes I hear like I've heard someone say like the 1920s and 30s. Okay, you might be quite shocked when this movement happened. Okay, so now here's when the movement started. Now, it started with a group of women. Now, this whole group is called the Guerrilla Girls. They're still around today. There's still groups out there. If you're a woman and you'd like to participate, and I believe you can be a man and participate, there's just not that many men. But with today's society, I'd see them accepting men as well. Now, the Guerrilla Girls, first off, it's a shock that it started in 1985, and that's when women's rights were starting to be heard in the art world. But the art world, if you watch that video, Who in the F is Jackson Pollock, with Terry Thornton, and you remember how the people treated her in the art world? Well, that's one of the things. The art world, they really, it's kind of a rich society in some aspects, and when you get up into that upper echelon, it's even harder to climb that ladder. And so for them not to allow women in, it's not a shock, because it's a business, and it's just they had to change the market. And in 1985, that's what they were doing. They were trying to get the message out. Now, I believe that they would have had social media back then. It would have probably gone a little bit even further with some of their messages. Now, one of the things I definitely think that's interesting about the Guerrilla Girls is how that they talked about that if every woman in the world gave $1 to their organization, which that's just insane, okay, to ask that everyone give $1 because that's a lot of money, but they could change the world, and I truly believe that. If one society came together and participated in one group, okay, once a month, our world could change. I mean, there's no denying that. And so think about it. If you gave $1 and everybody else in the whole world gave $1 to one group, okay, and there is 7 billion people in this country, and in America $1 is not that much. Other countries, some dollars are not that much, but if it was all done, that would be $7 billion to one organization, and it could change the world, right, for one special person. Now that's kind of what they're thinking is, and so that they're trying to get all these women to come together now. But what's more difficult, giving $1 or giving your time? Okay, I'll tell you right now, if someone volunteers time over money, I appreciate that way more, because your time is more valuable than $1 or a donation, so to speak. And so here, this is one of the things that they're also asking women to give their time, be part of this group. Now, a lot of Guerrilla Girls, they do not let on that they are a Guerrilla Girl. All right, especially in the earlier days. Now, some guerrilla women out there are that you know who's underneath the mask that they're wearing. Now, the idea behind them is they wear a mask. They're non-confrontational. They do not do any violent act to somebody looking at the art or the art piece itself. Okay, that's counterproductive. Okay, and I'll tell you how they make their stances. Okay, as we go through. But if you run into a former Guerrilla Girl, some of them are very open, and some of them are not. Just respect that if you find out that a person was a Guerrilla Girl, and just there's a lot of people and if you see a lady that's probably in her 60s and 70s of age, that is very artistic and strong in an art movement, you can almost guarantee they participated, helped, or themselves are a Guerrilla Girl. Okay? So you kind of have to think about that. You look at these ladies and you look at them and think about if they definitely participated a lot in the 60s with a lot of protests, and they have that kind of mentality, they're a strong woman, you can almost guarantee that they have participated with something with the Guerrilla Girls. And like I said, it's still going on today. They're still recruiting, and they're still looking for women out there. And if you'd like to participate, I would recommend it. Your voice is always important. Okay? Even if you're not an artist, you can still help. Okay? Participate with this, because if you feel passionate enough about women's art, this is what this is about. It's not about making art, it's about letting women have a voice in the arts world, and they still don't have enough, just FYI. Okay, so here we go. Alright, so here we have a very famous picture. We have three artists, women that are at this time in the 1980s that are really strong voices for the women's movement. The lady pointing her finger is Barbara Kruger. Okay, she's one of the first artists that we talk about in this section. We have Eva Hesse. I don't have Eva Hesse in this. I used to, but the idea of Eva Hesse, you guys kind of had trouble wrapping your brains around her work. She's one of the minimalist artists, and you guys tend not to like minimalist art, so I took her out. But I definitely would like you, if you'd like to take a look at Eva Hesse's work and see what you think of it. I say that for people that are interested outside of the class. And then I think the last person on the left is Cindy Sherman or Helen Frankenthaler. I'm not 100% sure on that last one. I know Helen Frankenthaler was part of it too as well. Now, this is one of those things. Okay, you look at these women, and they're in a panel discussion, and they're talking to the public. Okay, in a museum setting. Now they're hiding their identity, just like how a superhero hides their identity. Okay, you know of the character, you know who Batman is. Okay, but you don't know who's under the mask. And then as you read the comic, you find out that Bruce Wayne is the person underneath the mask. Now, for these panel discussions, these artists are very famous. So hearing their voice, okay, you know who's underneath the mask. Now, this is what's interesting. Okay, they don't care. All right, they're an established artist. Now, why are they doing this? Well, what they are doing is they are speaking on behalf of the women who can't speak. Okay, who are too afraid to speak. Now, it's not that they're too afraid. They're afraid they're going to get kicked out of the art world. These women have already made it into the art scene. They're definitely in the upper echelon. And they're basically there's no repercussion for them. There's no backlash. I mean, there might be a little bit, but it's not enough to affect their career. But for a young person that's in their 20s, starting out trying to get into the art world and trying to make their name, and they do this, well, the galleries can easily be like, well, she's a Gorilla Girl. We might not want that publicity part of our gallery, and they won't choose her on that statement alone because some of the things she said about other galleries, and so basically this allows the younger ones to have a voice, so they're talking on behalf of the young starting artist. All right. And so when you look at this, all right, they're basically representing you as a lady. If you're a lady listening to this, they're representing you, and they want you to be able to have a voice. And they're giving you the voice for you to the public. And I've been to rallies before, and I've been to protests. I've seen them, and and it's interesting hearing the women talk, and you know, there's a lot of anger involved with a lot of this, but there's also just a lack of knowledge. That's what's mostly important, that the lack of knowledge for the mass public about women in the art movement. A lot of people think women get representation, and the truth is not a lot do. And it's become better and better each decade, I would definitely say. And we're getting closer. We're getting closer. There's no denying it compared to what it once was. Now, here's another message that they would also do. With your money that you gave back in the 80s, they would take out advertisement spaces for high magazines, and a lot of magazines like Art in America, Art News, Arts Magazine, Art Form, and Flash Art. They would take out advertisements in these art magazines to let people know, okay, who they are and what their message is about. Now, here we go. We have what do all these artists have in common. Now, you might recognize some of the names from my lectures, like Jean-Michel Basquiat, Keith Haring in the second row. Let's see who else is in here. Chuck Close. We've talked about him. Let's see, Richard Serra. Let's see who else. Claes Oldenburg. Let's see who else. Roy Lichtenstein is another one I see that we've talked about. And see, like right here is a group of artists that when you become an art major and you take art history and you go through the forms of art history, especially if you're an art history major, you will know almost every name on this list when you get to contemporary art. Now, some of them are not as popular as they were in the 80s as they are now. But there's a lot of names in here that, okay. Now, some people, like Jean-Michel Basquiat, he didn't mind having his name in the mix. It's basically free publicity for him. Keith Haring, same thing. But you look at some of the more established artists, and Roy Lichtenstein didn't mind, and Chuck Close didn't mind, but there is one person that did get kind of upset on this. Peter Volkus down at the very bottom did get a little upset. He's a ceramicist, and he's a great ceramicist. All right, his work is amazing, but he's a very macho-esque kind of man, and so to have his name in here, he was a little bit upset. But what do these men? What do these all have in common? Well, they're men, okay, and they're big blue chip artists now. All right, every name that's in here, they sell their work for millions of dollars. Now here, okay, the Gorillaz report card. Okay, now this to me I found really interesting. Now, when you look at the work that they're doing here, is they're straight out targeting a lot of New York galleries at this point. Okay, now you look at some of these galleries, and you can see like a few of them, they have little comments. Okay, now when you look at like Edward Thorp Gallery at the bottom, second from the bottom, it had one artist in 95, and then in 96 they went to 4 female artists, and it says making excellent progress. And they did. They went up 3. So maybe they're trying to find those female artists to kind of get their gallery a little bit more of a lead. But then you look at a few of them that you have, like one that had 4. The Leo I can't say it. Castellini. Yeah, Castelli. Sorry, Leo Castelli Gallery. Sorry. It's a little early for me. And it had 4, and then it went to 3. I believe the artist that was part of that group moved to go to the Edward Thorp Gallery. And so it says not paying attention. Well, that's not fair when one gallery goes to another, or artist goes to another gallery. I feel bad for that gallery, and I'm sure that they picked up the pace next in the next thing. In the next year, I don't know. But when you look at a majority of what you're seeing here, you see the second one, Mary Boone. Okay, first of all, it's a female gallery. Okay, and then you also have Diane Brown. Okay, another female gallery, and it says has 2, and it says could do even better next to her name. But the next, when you look at Mary Boone, it has 0, then 0, and that's saying, and it says next to it, boy crazy. Okay, yes, she's boy crazy. She's one of the biggest galleries in New York City still today. And now, does she have women in her gallery today? Yes, she does. But what she came out and said, and I agree with her on this, on that aspect. She says, being a gallery owner, it's more than representing art. It's also, you got to keep the electricity on, you got to keep the mortgage, you got to make sure you don't go out of business. And if buyers aren't going to buy women art, then why should she put her business in risk by having women artists in it? And so that right there, it kind of tells you that, these people are asking a lot, but at the same time, the market, they're afraid that, you go out of business. In today's time, you could see that a lot of galleries, like in Dallas alone, I think like 4 or 5 years ago, there was like 8 or 9 pop-up galleries that just boom popped up, and I think only 1 or 2 of them have survived, and that's not because of the art itself. It's a hard business. It's hard to sell people, especially if you're in a recession like we are or when we were really in a major recession. It's hard to start a business, and so here's these galleries. They're in the kind of same boat. In the 80s, there was a recession going on, and so to take a chance on women art at this time, it was tough for a lot of business, especially in New York, especially when it's a competitive market. You look at all these galleries. I mean, that's a ton of galleries in New York City. But like I said, New York is the capital of the art world, and so to have all that competition, I mean, your doors could shut very quickly. And that's why some of it I kind of feel that they're making progress, yes, but then some of it I kind of agree with Mary Boone. Now, Charles Cole Gallery is the same gallery that my mother was part of, and she was part of it for a few years. And the gallery decided to shut their doors because Charles Cole decided to retire. And that is also another thing. As the galleries start to get more and more established, they eventually start to shut their doors as they get older, and they just don't pass the business down. Sometimes they do, but majority of the time they just kind of shut their doors. And that's what happened with my mother, but my mother was part of that gallery. Now, when you look over here at the next section, which art magazine is the worst for women last year? Well, you see there's 13%, 16%, 22%, 24%, and 25%. Now, each magazine here, I've got to be fair for each one of these. They're all different in their own right. Flash Art Magazine is more of a kind of like a tabloid magazine. Jeff Koons was a big person for Flash. Cindy Sherman was another one, and they're kind of, scandalous kind of art magazine. If I want to know the dirty, trashy stuff, typically I'll read that magazine. The write-ups on that, they're okay. I actually like Artforum a lot. I read that one a lot, and Art in America. Those are kind of my two go-to. Art News, it's pretty good, but it's stuff that I've already read generally in Art in America, and it's always kind of a little dated in some aspects. And Arts Magazine, it's okay. It's not my favorite. I actually find the writing kind of boring when I read out of those. But Art in America is pretty much my go-to. Where am I finding most of my information? My monthly description of Art Magazine, Art in America Magazine, and Art Forms. I mean, I read those a lot. So if you're ever wanting to know about art and current history, getting a subscription to these magazines really do help, and they do it online. So if you're not a person that likes magazines, they also do it online, and you can check them out. But I will say a majority of the writers too are women now. I see a lot of women writing. There's a few that I actually look forward to reading what they write about. One of my favorite go-to every week is GlassTires.com for Texas art. I mean, I watch those two ladies and I read what they write every week. And so there are more women's voices being heard. I think with social media, it's becoming more and more abundant. Now, another thing that they would also do is they would put these flyers on top of the building or on the building itself, and they'd wheat paste them down, telling people that were coming into the place, hey, this gallery doesn't represent enough women, and they'd put these messages all over the building. And of course, you just take a hose to it and it comes right off, but it's an annoyance. And they would do it daily until you changed your ways. And if they really were an advocate against the gallery, they would also show up at the art opening. At an art opening, galleries tend to make about 40 to 60% of their overall sales for the gallery that opening night. Buyers will come in that night. They'll get wined and dined with their free beer or wine, and sometimes food if it's like lighter doors, depending on the gallery. And they will come look at the art. If they see an art piece that they want, they'll buy it that night for the buyers. And the galleries really, that's their big business day. And so Guerrilla Girls will show up, and they'll basically carry their mask in their purse, and they walk in, and they stand in front of an art piece, and then they'll all in sync put their mask on really quickly, and they'll stand in front of the art. And then as a viewer wants to see the art, They won't let you see the art, and they'll usually have like a stack of bananas in their purse or something, and they will hand you a banana. And basically, there's two things will happen. The gallery will shut down the show and turn off the lights and shut the doors, and everything's over with. Or they will keep everything going, and they'll just call the police, and then the police arrest the women. And because of and that's another option. So so women would get arrested for doing this kind of protest, but to them, it's what they want. That's more publicity. It's more. Did they harm the artwork? No. Did they distract the buyer from buying it? Possibly, which could hurt the business. And then the other thing is, if they get arrested, well, then they're in the news, and that's free publicity. So for them, it's worth the risk of getting arrested for. Now, you typically see like these kind of protests at major museums that don't do enough women art. And I think the DMA in the 80s, for one full year, they only showed nothing but men's art in the whole museum. Every retrospect news show that was coming through was all a man's show, and so the women's movement got really upset, and this is what you'd see: protests, and they would stand outside the entrance of the museum, and it was totally legal to do this. It's legal to protest. If you're against a message, sure, come protest for anything. It's perfectly legal. So here there's a group of women protesting in front of this museum. I've seen this. I remember my mom participating and helping with an organization once doing this. So anyway, it's very powerful, and it's very important. Now here, this is something that a lot of the Guerrilla Girls sent out, which I think is really kind of important to understand. When they knew that they had to change the art world, where do you start? Well, you start with where the money is. And so here's a letter that they sent out, and it said, Dear Art Collector, it has come to our attention that your collection, like most, doesn't contain enough art by women. We know that you feel terrible about this, and will rectify the situation immediately. All our love, Guerrilla Girls. Okay, and it's kind of a funny statement. Now, I'm not going to tell you which collector I went to's house in Dallas, but I went to someone's house, and when you walked into their house, they had one of these original images or letters printed out, and she had it framed in her home. And I found it really funny because when I walked into the space, I noticed that all the work that was in the person's house was mostly done by women. And so and I asked her when I was installing an art piece when I was younger, I said, why do you have that letter up if you already have a large amount of women collection in your home? And she told me, she's like, well, the reason is because I might need to buy more. I might not have enough as it is, and it's a reminder. And so when you walk in the door, also she also says that when people come over to her house, that they'll read the letter and they might think about their own collection, and they might want to buy more female art just like what I've done. And so it's not just a statement for her; it's for people that are entering her house. And I always kind of like that. And she did make it look really pretty, and a nice gilded frame, and it's a simple little pink letter inside there. It's kind of faded now, but anyway. On that note, on that, let's get started about the women that I have chose for this lecture. Barbara Kruger. Now, I chose Barbara Kruger for our first artist. I love Barbara Kruger's work, which is funny, being a dyslexic, someone who has trouble reading, someone who has trouble writing, and for someone to to choose for one of their favorites, to choose a text artist. It's kind of ironic in some aspects. Now, one of the things for Barbara Kruger, she's strong, she's powerful, and her voice, when for the art world, she's all about making that message. Okay, so let's go right into our work. I shop, therefore I am, is this piece. So as you look at this title, okay, and then you look at the message it's given out, what is she saying here? Well, the message she's saying is what you shop for is who you are, okay? The clothes you wear, okay, I'm sure you've heard the clothes you wear it's the clothes that make the man, okay? Dress like the job that you want, okay? Are some really broad statements that you hear about clothes, and it's basically the same kind of message. When you see somebody who wears certain outfits, can you tell what kind of personality they have? Okay, what kind of person they are? Some people see my clothes and they might. I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, and so I wear a lot of graphic T-shirts that have Star Wars or superhero stuff, and I like that kind of stuff. So some people might see me and go, "Oh, he's kind of a nerdy kind of guy." But I do dress up. I like to dress up. I typically have like what I call my art show uniform, where it's like usually I like to wear a dress shirt, a vest, and some black or dark blue jeans, and boots. I wear a lot of boots, and so that's kind of my outfits, my gallery outfits, what I wear every time. So. I kind of have like a statement. When I show up to places, I wear the same thing. I feel comfortable in those kinds of clothes. I feel comfortable in a three-piece something. I like three-piece suits. And so that kind of just talks about my personality. I'm not a trendy. I'm more of a classic, contemporary-looking guy when I dress. So when you look at this, okay, I shop for there I am, okay, it's talking about who you are when you shop. Now, she put these in a Barney's, all right, in New York, and they used this campaign and they still do it today, where they hire an artist every year, and then they put their art throughout the mall or their shop, and it's tons of messages that allow people to think about who they are when they're buying the art, and it also just kind of makes the art world and the fashion world kind of come together in that store, especially. So let's look at this next piece. Now, here are two types of gloves, okay, and they're kind of holding hands endearingly, okay? When you look at some of these gloves, some of them are masculine and some of them are feminine. A lot of people would consider the dishwashing glove to be more feminine, and some people would think about the leather work glove to be more masculine. Now, when you look at these kinds of gloves, okay, yes, they do have a feminine idea behind them, but I will say this. When I look at this from my personality, I think of my mom. She wears the more leather gloves, dealing with her bronzes and how she works with the metal, and she wears those kinds of gloves. I've always felt when my mom would, as a kid, would touch the side of my face, her hands always felt coarse and felt like sandpaper. And if it was ever smooth, it'd been unusual for me to feel across my face. As a child, she's always had rough hands. But my dad, on the other hand, he has softer hands than my mother. And I remember my dad actually wearing dish gloves at points to keep his hands from getting dirty, especially when he's in the shop at a school printing. And so when you look at these two, they're total yin and yang of each other for me. Now, my wife's family, the father, he's a doctor, so he works, and the mother stays at home. And so the mom has the dish liquid kind of gloves and personality, and my father-in-law, when he does something that has to deal with like crafts or work with his hands, he loves putting on those gloves and working. For him, it's a step towards being, I'm a man working with these gloves. So for me, I see my wife's side of the family, and this is totally stereotypical. From my side of the family, it's reverse. Sorry, the phone rang, and I had to pause it for a second. So anyway, so it's reverse for my family. So I want you to think about what your family is. Now, what my children might think, yes, my wife is the more the lady, and I'm the more man in the family. And I have tons and tons of work gloves. I have different types of work gloves for different projects that I deal with. And so I actually love working gloves. I have like 16 pairs in my studio, and a lot of people are like, why do you have so many? I'm like, well, when I'm doing projects, it's always best to have extras for people when they help out. And so anyway, so yeah, so work gloves, it does talk a lot about personality. Here's the Barney's store that I was talking about. So you can see the flyers. Okay, it's a nice high-end shop. Okay, Barney's is close to Neiman Marcus in Fifth Avenue, Saks Fifth Avenue. It's kind of that same ideal mentality. There used to be one in Dallas. It just was not as successful in Dallas because it was next to Neiman Marcus, which is not a shock to be competing against Neiman Marcus and not winning. Now, here's one of the signs. Buy me, I'll change your life. There's another one. You want it, you buy it, you forget it. Okay, two different signs. Now, I will say this. My wife loves to shop. I'm one of those people, if it looks good on me, I'll buy it. If it's comfortable, sure, I'll buy it. But I'm not big on, this is a new fashion trend. I can care less. If it's something nice and looks good on me, that's kind of how I go with my shopping. I really don't care if it's out of fashion or in fashion. Usually I'm price savvy a lot of times. So for me, now there are some things that, like vest, I got a vest a few years ago, or I'd say about 5 or 6 years ago, and I fell in love with wearing vests, and I've been kind of on that trend. I don't know if it's out of fashion or not, but I tend to really like wearing vests, for me personally. Now, the you want it, you buy it, and you forget it piece. When I first got married, my wife and I were going out, and she was complaining that she had nothing to wear, and this is before kids and everything, and so she was like, I just don't have any outfits. And I was like, and so I went in her closet and I pulled out a couple dresses and I was like, oh, I love this on you. And she was like, well, that's a springtime outfit. And I'm like, okay. And some of you ladies might relate to this. And then I pull out another thing and I was like, ooh, that's really pretty. And I don't think I've ever seen you wear it. And I looked down in the corner and there's a tag on it. And I'm like, you didn't even wear this. And she was like, well, it's out of fashion. That's totally last year's fashion. And I'm like, well, why are you keeping it? And she's like, well, it'll go back into fashion. And that as a man, I don't get. I'm just like, if I could, if I bought underwear, I would literally go into the changing room and wear the underwear out, I guess, out of the store. I'm one of those people, as soon as I buy it, I wear it. I think a lot of men are like that. We buy things. I'm one of those people, if I get brand new shoes, and I walk into a shoe store and I get a pair of shoes or boots, and they ask me, do I want to wear the boots out? I'm like, yes, I always wear them out. I never put the old shoes back on. And so for me, that's part of, that instant gratification. So one time I put in my closet, you want it, you buy it, you forget it. and that was the biggest mistake as an early married man I ever did. I did it as a joke, thinking it was be funny, and yeah, I got in the doghouse really quickly on that. So, on that note, men out there, when you first get married, don't pick on a woman's wardrobe. Always tell them they look beautiful, even when they wake up and they're not so pretty. Tell them they look beautiful. Okay, and when they're got a cold, tell them that they look beautiful even when they don't. Okay, and when they become pregnant, that's the prettiest they'll ever be. Trust me. Okay, so you make sure that they know that. All right, those little tips I just told you right there for you men. All right. If you do that, you will be happily married. Trust me. Okay. If you keep your wife happy and let her know how beautiful she is, that's all that matters. Trust me, in a marriage, okay? Keep her happy, let her know how beautiful, all right? And massage her feet. If you can massage her feet once in a blue moon, you'll be a very happy husband, trust me, okay? Little tips, all right. Now, this installation changed my life. I deal with large-scale photography and large-scale scale vinyl installations. Now, I don't use the text like she does, but I walked into this exhibit and my mind was completely blown. Now, I know that there's languages in here, and you might be reading as I'm talking and chuckling. I usually do this lecture, and I hear people chuckle throughout the whole lecture. Yeah, there's words in here that are very aggressive. But that's not what gravitated to me. It was the materials she was using, and the way she was laying it out, and the direction and the design behind it. I was just gravitated towards, and for me, this changed my life. And I walked through her exhibit, and my mind was completely blown. It made me want to do art just like hers. And now my style is totally different. I'm more architectural in my work. And when I see her imagery and my imagery, it doesn't relate, but the materials we use does. And so this body of work changed me, okay? And so for her not to be in museums and galleries, if I never saw her show, I don't think it would have taken me to my level that I am today. And so I thank her for that. Now, another thing she does is billboards. And this is great for someone who's a Guerrilla Girl. You could put these messages out that are on behalf of the Guerrilla Girls, or your own art. She would have collectors buy the signs, or she would personally buy the signs, and every month or every few months they would change out the sign. And so this one's in New York, "Don't be a jerk," okay, which is kind of funny. But in Kansas City, she had a sign above a museum right on the entryway of the school, and I was always wondering if she was purposely relating her messages to the students at Kansas City Art Institute. And so as I would walk down the street, there's a little corner coffee store, and I'd go get my little coffee, and they give you a piece of chocolate when you got your coffee, and I'd dunk that in my coffee, and I'd get myself a chocolate coffee every morning, and I'd walk in, get my coffee, and I'd see the sign. And there's one that always, it was about my into my sophomore year, going into my senior year, or junior year, going into my senior year. And I would look at the sign, and I remember one time it said to me, or it just said, I thought it was talking to me. It said, "Today you're going to make something beautiful." And so I would go and I'd work, and then the next day I'd go get my coffee and I'd look at it and went, well, I think I got something going. I'd talk to the sign. And then the next one is, the work that you do is the work that starts for the future. And so I kind of was like, yeah, okay, I think I got something that could be my future. And I kept talking to the sign, and then she came to the museum and gave an artist talk, and I went to go see her and see the talk, and I was again amazed of her vocabulary, how smart she is, because being a dyslexic, it's one of those things. I'm a very smart gentleman, but when it comes to talking and being and being, sounding educated. Sometimes I feel like I'm not always there as a person, but I know I'm smart. And so, but when I heard her talk, I was like, God, she's brilliant. And maybe that's just me being harsh on myself. But when I saw her work, I was immediately amazed of how it changes my life. And I told her at the end of the lecture, I went up to talk to her for a second. I said, you have a sign on 43rd and Walnut Street, and I just want to let you know I walk by them every day, and I feel like you and I have had a conversation for like the last year and a half. And she kind of chuckled, and she thought maybe I was a little weird, but I told her, I said, some of your messages really helped me through undergrad, and she was like, well, thank you, I guess. And I go, no, well, thank you, and I walked away. And so that's all I wanted to say to her. But like I said, she's one of my favorites. Okay, now let's get to the next artist, Helen Frankenthaler. Okay, now this artist is the feminine version of Jackson Pollock. Okay, but and that's the best way I can relate her to you. But she's different than Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock would splatter paint across the canvas with the fling of his brush. Helen Frankenthaler pours the canvas and lets gravity take its course as it goes down through the canvas, and she directs it by the angling of her canvas as she pours the paint down. Okay? So here's one of her first pieces. Now this is a fairly large piece. It's about 20 feet by 10 feet. Fairly large. Okay. Now notice the center is empty. Okay. And she's focusing on the corners, especially where Jackson Pollock had trouble. Okay, so it's abstract, but she's leaving this empty void, and the canvas is unprimed. It is completely bare. And so it's very raw looking, kind of in the same aspects of Jackson Pollock. And she pours the paint down the side. Here's another version. She likes leaving that empty void. Okay. Now, here comes the next piece, which is totally different. So we get to the last piece of her. Okay. Now we're going to be talking about Georgia O'Keeffe in this lecture, and Georgia O'Keeffe, she decided to take her work and her whole art style, and she moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, from New York to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Now Santa Fe at this time had little local art scene, but this woman, when she showed up, she changed the whole art scene and made it one of the top 5 places to buy art for a while. I think it's still the same. Now, Helen Frankenthaler went with her for a short little bit, and so her work even changed, just like every artist that was at the time. And so when Helen Frankenthaler left, this is her work. It has more of a landscape feel. It has more of a kind of a desert and water and sunrise kind of a feel altogether. And here she's trying to illustrate what's going on in her life at that point. And so, and I'll tell you, if you've never been to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and ever been out in a deserty area, it is a very different feel. It's a different atmosphere, different lifestyle. And you can definitely tell when you see artists' work that when they're from New York and then they move to a deserty climate, it changes. It just totally changes their perception of their art. Okay, Louise Nevelson. All right. Now, what I love about Louise Nevelson is how her work is all about design, and her objects are hard to understand and what they are. And she chooses forms that are very recognizable by themselves, but by changing the color of them and using the aesthetic of design, she's able to transform these found objects into works of art in collages and installations. Okay, so let's go into our first piece. Alright, so here, I love this box, okay? First of all, it's all made from leather. Alright, it's a leather-bound box. She went to a shoe factory and found a bunch of scraps. And so these are the fallouts of the leather shoes that have been not cut right, not completely done. And so she took these shapes and made these 9 little boxes and wrapped the leather around them and put them together in a nice frame. And it is a beautiful, elegant piece. The layers of black and the values that occur, it's all one tone, but when the light hits it, it transforms it into this value scale. She also does installations so that you walk through her pieces. I'm not a big fan of these. I like the things when they're on the wall. When they're in the middle of the room, they don't seem to grab my attention as much. I walk through them, but I'm not in love with them. It's more of a labyrinth thing, and I'm just kind of not a fan of. It's just too. It feels like there's something missing. But when they're on the wall, like this piece I love. Now, when you look at this, what do you see? Most students see a city skyline, and that's kind of where I think she's going with this. Now, what is the objects? Well, a majority of the objects are chocolate tins and chocolate molds. And so she's using these forms, these metal tins that they use to make molds to make candy. And here she's taking them, spray painting them black, and painting them with regular paint. Solid black, and then she pins them up onto the wall in this collage, and it comes together as a beautiful sculpture. Now, I also show this to other students, and what do they see here? And I also hear circuit boards. Okay, I'll tell you right now, circuit boards were not invented when this piece was made, or if they were not as detailed as they are today, like this piece. What is this about? Well, this is where her work totally changed. Instead of trying to find objects, she would take an object that was already pre-existing and she would destroy it. Okay? And so right here is a destroyed sewing machine. And so the little thimbles and needles, and she would glue them into a pattern and an arrangements. And when we look at this, yes, we see something that we recognize like a circuit board, but the truth is that was not what she was going for. She's just going for a sense of design. Here's another one of her deconstruction pieces, okay? And this was a tractor piece, okay? It's all portions of a tractor, okay? And I usually ask the class, what do they see? What are they getting? What kind of machine is she destroying? And some people say record player, and some people say, is that a disc to a brake? And yes, it is, but it's for a tractor, okay? And she tore apart a gigantic tractor, painted all the pieces black, and then she arranged it into the space. It was a solid tractor, okay, of multiple pieces. And so, to me, I thought that was kind of interesting, taking something that's already pre-existing and destroying it and making it into something new. Now, her White Series one is totally different, and I like the story behind this. For Guggenheim, she was having a solo exhibition, and she was doing the entryway, the round, where it's the kind of circular gallery space. And just to let you know, to start at the bottom to work your way at the top, it's about 1 mile long. And so she had to fill in that space. And so here, she takes this space, okay, and she fills it with these white objects. Now, the story behind this, and I don't know if it's just a glorified story or if it's true, but I like it anyway, and I just tell it anyway. She went to an estate sale where she gets most of her stuff outside of New York, and she was looking at this house, and she goes into the back of the house, and there's a barn, and the person who lived there, who passed away, had a gigantic wood shop that he was making, or she was making, furniture. And so she went back inside to the house and found the owners and said, is this house going to be for sale? And the people were like, yes. And at this point, she started making herself a career with her art and started having some success in her sales. And so she decided she was going to buy the house, and she asked if she could have everything in the barn. if she bought the house. And the homeowners agreed that they would sell it to her. So they sold her the whole barn. And then she said for the land, she goes, your family can use the land. I don't need that for farming. If you want to use it for farming, I just need the house and the barn. And so the family thought it was a win-win situation. And so she basically treated their house like a studio and would bring portions of the barn in and make these little boxes and ship them to New York. And then they would be arranged when she got to the Guggenheim show, and she would arrange these little boxes together. And she made a gigantic installation in the Guggenheim, and every piece in this show sold. You rarely see a white exhibit. Most of them are black, just FYI. Okay, if you ever see a retrospect show. Louise Bourgeois. Okay, now I'm going to tell a story about Louise Bourgeois that my students that I've had over the years love the story behind it. Okay, now the way this story starts out. Okay, first of all, Louise Bourgeois. I graduated in 2004, and she was having a piece put into the museum, and I want to think it was like 2000 or 2001. I can't remember the exact date when they were putting one of her pieces up in the museum. And that week at school in art history, we were talking a lot about Louise Bourgeois because they were putting a piece outside of the school at the museum. And so the teachers chose to make this a huge opportunity, and she was coming to talk and told us that we had to go for our class. And so we've been talking about her for a week. And so it starts out with my story. First off, starts out with my roommate. Now, my roommate, Anthony, is a very ugly man. Now, I changed the name because someone might be knowing who I'm talking about. So I changed the name completely. So his real name's not Anthony. But since this is going online, I don't want the original person to get upset. Okay. Now, Anthony was not a very good-looking man. Okay, so you see why I'm changing it. He's probably one of the ugliest men I've ever met. And just to give you an idea what he looked like. Okay, imagine Dirk Nowinski with a red beard. Okay, that goes down to about your stomach and balding. Okay, very tall guy. Okay, and so we're in sculpture class, and we're sitting outside in our break, drinking our coffee. Now, I'm sitting outside, and I'm looking, and there is a little lady walking down the walkway going towards the museum, and I nudged my roommate, and I said to him, I said, "Hey, I think that's Louise Bourgeois," and he was like, "No, it's not Louise Bourgeois." And I'm like, "Yeah, I totally believe it's Louise Bourgeois," and he was like, "Okay," and so I said, "Well, you should go talk to her." Now, he was from an Amish town, and he was part Amish, and so. And when he came to live with me, he hardly had anything. And one of the things about living with me, I kind of corrupted him a little bit. You're not supposed to drink as Amish people, and I had him drinking within a short little bit, and I found out he liked Guinness. And but also in his culture where he lived, he spoke Dutch, French, some Spanish, and he spoke English, and one other language, I can't remember. And so he spoke 5 languages. He always said, "I speak 5 languages." He was a brilliant man. And so, but ugly as sin. And like 6'4", 6'5", really tall guy. And so, and lanky. So I said, "You should go talk to her in French." And he was like, No, I'm not going to go talk to him in French. And I was like, "All right, I'll get you a 6-pack of Guinness if you go over and just say hi." And he was like, okay. And he loved Guinness. So I said, "If she doesn't talk to you, well then, oh well." And so he walks over, and so I hear him go, Madame Bourgeois, and she goes, oui, and that's the part of French I only know, because after that, I don't know what else they said. And so I hear them talking, and then she chuckles a little bit, and she tells him to, and now she's like barely 5 foot tall, and so she tells him to bend down, and she tugs on his beard and pats his cheeks, and so then he comes back kind of hopping and hobbling over like I say, like a one of those gigantic Muppets on the Muppet Show. And so he comes back over to me, and he was like, well, that was a great encounter. And I'm like, oh, well, how'd it go? So what'd she say to you? And he goes, she's taking me out to lunch after my class is over and she gets done with her meeting. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So we go back to work, and as we're working, I tell him, I said, hey, well, you can't wear your welding clothes. You need to go home and get some slacks and a t-shirt on. I'll drive you. So I drive him back home. He changes clothes, and I take him to the museum where they were going to have lunch. And so it's a nice upscale restaurant, so he had to look a little nicer. And so I take him in, and I go look, and there she is sitting at a table, and he sits down with her and starts talking, and I kind of pretend like I'm looking at the show, making sure everything's going well, because he's kind of a weird guy. And so so next thing you know, I leave and I go to my class, and I had art history class, and he was supposed to be in the class, and he doesn't show up. So I go back home, and there he is, and I say, hey, you missed art history, and he goes, oh, I figured you'd give me the notes. And I'm like, yeah, I'll give you the notes. And so he says, well, I've been contemplating. She invited me to come to the gala tonight, and I told him, I go, well, you know, it's a black tie affair, and you don't have any suits. And he goes, that's what I've been trying to figure out. How do I get a suit for tonight? And so I said, okay, well, let's go try to find you a suit. So he had no money, and I didn't have very much money. So we went through a couple thrift stores. We found suits, but none of them fit him. And so I had one last option. I said, if this doesn't work, I don't know what else I can afford. I can't afford to go to a suit place and get you a suit. And because he was 6'4" and skinny. And so we went to this one place, and it was a costume store. And I asked the guy, I said, hey, do you have any tuxedos that would fit him? And the guy looked at him and goes, I have one possibly. And so he goes and tries it on. Now, if you've seen the movie Dumb and Dumber, you might remember the character, Jim Carrey's character, where he comes out wearing a blue tuxedo. I swear to you, that's exactly what Anthony was wearing. So Anthony's wearing this blue tuxedo with the frill and the bow tie, and he even had a top hat with it. Didn't have a cane, but he had a top hat with it. And I looked at him with his red beard, and it worked. It straight out just worked. And I was like, you know what? I don't think very many people could pull that off, but I think you can. And so he we get the suit, and it was $65, and back then that was a lot of money for me. So I told him, I said, but this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so then we get back to the house, and it's almost time to go drop him off at our hotel room, and so we get going on down over to the hotel, and as we're on our way, I said, hey, did you get her any flowers? Stop and get her. He was like, no. Oh, I should probably do that. And so we pull into a local grocery store, and he gets a bouquet of flowers and hops into the car, and we get to the hotel, and I go to the entrance, and I pull in, and I let him out, and I said to him, I go, now don't do anything I wouldn't do. Joking, of course, because she was in her 90s, and he was an older student. He was in his he was about 35, and so he was he just kind of looked at me like, hush, and went inside. And so I figured the gala got done at midnight, and so I figured he'd probably be rolling in around 12 o'clock. So 12 o'clock comes and goes, and then 1 o'clock comes and goes, and about 2 o'clock, all of a sudden I hear the door open, downstairs, and we lived on the 4th floor, and so I hear the door open, and I can always hear Anthony coming up the stairs, and it's these big stomp, 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 and then all of a sudden I hear these little tiny stomps, so it's like stomp, stomp, tap, 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 stomp, stomp, tap, 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 stomp, stomp, tap, 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 and so I'm like, oh, heck no, I'm saying, and at that moment I looked around our apartment, and I had people over that night, so I had pizza boxes and beer cans all over the place, you know, like a typical bachelor pad. So I run into the kitchen as fast as I can, grab a trash bag, go to the coffee table, slide everything off the coffee table into a trash bag, and throw it over the couch, because I didn't want her to see all the beer cans everywhere and everything, and the mess that was there. And the house was a disarray. And so he brings her in, and so he said to me, he goes, yeah, I brought Madame Bourgeois inside, and can she come in? I'm like, sure, the house is a mess. And so she walks in, and I say, sorry, the maid's been out this week. And she kind of chuckled. And so she wanted to see one of my art pieces. Now, if you remember me talking about Chuck Close, I was doing a wedding dress for my wife out of love letters, and she wanted to see that. And so she looked at it, and then she also wanted to thank me for dressing up Anthony. And then at that, they only stayed for about 15-20 minutes. And then I said, do you want me to take you guys back to your hotel? And it was a nice night, and it was only about half a mile away, if that, I'd say, maybe 4 blocks away. And so she was like, no, we'll walk. And she said, and Anthony could protect her, and he could. He was a big guy. And so they walked back to the hotel. And he came back home. And so one of the things I thought was really interesting, over this time they became friends, and he would write her letters, and they became pen pals back and forth. He'd get a letter occasionally from her, and then he would send her a letter back, and they were kind of interesting. But where the story gets interesting as I go along, you'll see that she gave him some gifts of a prince, and I'll show you some of the prints that he gave her, or she gave him. And so now looking at this lady, what kind of art do you think she does? I think you might be quite shocked. So, is this what you pictured? She does these gigantic spiders. This one, you can see, crosses a whole street. And this is the one that is very similar to the installation one that was put in across the street from Kansas City Art Institute. I fell in love with these pieces. Okay, you might not love spiders. I don't even like spiders, but I love these pieces. All right. Outside, they're wonderful. When you put them inside, they're a little creepy, and they're all over the world. Here's another one. Here's one inside. Can you see? It's a little creepier inside. I'm not a big fan of them being inside. Now, the next slide here shows you how these were all put together. Now, it's really simple. It's a cylinder, okay, that has holes burrowed out, okay, and then the legs are put in, and there's a rod that has what do you call it? Enough to put a nut on. You can screw it in like a bolt. There's a bolt inside there that can be screwed in, and then you screw the bolt all the way up, and if it's a permanent piece, you just weld the bolt onto the back, and then the top is kind of put on like a light bulb. It screws in, and the bottom is the same way, and you can kind of see how it's all made together. It's a really simple process to put these together. They're all made out of solid bronze. They weigh a ton, okay, but they are balanced just so perfectly in the way it's kind of lays together. It takes a crane to put one up, Joe. Just a FYI. Now, see, like I said, inside, this is a creepy piece. When I saw one of her shows, I was like, ugh, I don't like going into these spaces when it's like this, where it's dark and it's got this cage-like thing. I'm not a big fan of these. I like when they're free flowing. Now here, okay, is one of the pieces that he got a print of hers, and so this one said together, and this one on the left is the piece that they received, and I thought he was just interesting. Now he could have sold these prints, and I don't know if he did. I doubt he did. He could have sold these prints for a lot of money, and so, but when he graduated, that was one of his prints that he got, and then he decided he was going to go to art school, and he applied to art school at Yale, and she wrote a letter on his behalf. And to have a letter from Louise Bourgeois that's pretty powerful. So he got accepted, and I know for a fact it was because of her letter and her probably kind of talked about him and everything, and so he went to grad school at Yale, and when he graduated, this is another print that he received. All right. Now, she died shortly after he received this print, but there was a portion, and I kind of, they hung out and they went to movies together. He would say, "Oh, I saw Louise Bourgeois today," and I'm like, "Oh, well, good. How's things going?" And he was like, "Oh, fine," and so they were really just good friends. And so I like to pick on them, especially when I saw her show. Now, the piece you see on the left here was in Art in America. Just took out the cover, all the text and stuff for Art in America. And then so I got the issue and I looked through it. And about halfway through the magazine, I saw this series of work. And I just thought, oh, these are different. These aren't the pretty spiders. These are kind of these metamorphic kind of shapes. And I was called Chris, oh, that's his name, Anthony, and I told him, I said, hey, nothing happened between you and Madame Bourgeois, and he jokingly was saying, a man never kisses and tells, and I was like, gross, 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 gross. so I don't think anything ever happened. I just find this to be kind of funny. So I just tell you that story. Students love the story that I've told it over the years. So now you've heard it. And then this is what she said in her talk, "Bye, boys and girls," because she believed that everybody was younger than her. And she was probably right. Okay, Georgia O'Keeffe. Now, we're going to get into this series of Georgia O'Keeffe. Now, she is probably the largest female artist in popularity right now. During the 40s and 50s, she was making strong impact for women's movement for art. There weren't very many female artists at that time, and so here she is, and and like I said, she moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico with a group of artists, and she changed the whole art economy there. That tells you how powerful of a woman she was. Now, when we talk about her personality, her love life, and her artwork, like I said, some of them have a feminine reproductive organ kind of a feel in her paintings. Is that what they're intended to be? I believe so, yes. Okay. So I'm just going to, not dodge around it. That's what her work's about. Okay. So let's get into where she looked a little younger. So here she is. Okay. She was really pretty, but she was super strong as a woman, and she went to look for her husband, Alfred Stieglitz, okay, at his gallery, and went into Alfred Stieglitz's space, showed her work. He loved her work and loved her as a person. Now, I said that that's her husband. They got married. He definitely helped her career. He's a famous photographer, but he really pushed for her success, and I think that's what he opened the doors for her a lot of ways, because a lot of the doors wouldn't have been opened and she really kind of pushed it for him. Now, I love this picture of the two of them together. It kind of reminds me of my mom and Harry. Whenever I see them kind of in the same poses, I kind of take pictures of them doing the same thing. And now, so they definitely loved each other. He loved going to Yellow Bend, and he took a lot of pictures. That's where his most of his pictures are from. Is from Yellow Bend Park. And so when he passed away, I think she hates the desert or hates the forest and decided to move to the desert. And so because it was total opposite of what he liked. And so I think she just wanted a change. Now, here is her piece that I wanted to talk about. So in this piece, okay, so here's the red poppy is this, and she got a chance to be in the U.S. stamps. Okay, now she's already passed away when this came out. I think it says at the bottom. I want to say that these were like in '94 or '96. If I'm not mistaken. So when these stamps were issued, okay, this tells you how popular this image was. She would, you could choose back then, you could choose to get the American flag stamp, which is the #1 stamp still today, or this one. And for that year, the first year it came out, she outsold the American flag stamp in the stamp collection. And it's the only stamp to ever get a second issue. So it did 2 years of an issue because it was so popular. And no stamp in the history has ever had that much. So that tells you right there that even when people have the choice, plain, flags or pretty flowers, which one would you choose? And more people would choose the pretty flowers. And I kind of say this a lot of times when you see this stuff. I always tell artists jokingly, if you ever want to make money, make art with cats in it. People love cats, and you could make a lot of money with art with kitties. And same thing with flowers. A lot of people love flowers. Okay, so now when I talked about the painting area, this is I kind of roughly went quickly through this. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about it. Okay. Picasso, the one on the right, he did this one, Girl Before Mirror. And when he was doing the Girl Before Mirror image, he's talking about the physicality that the woman changes when she has a child and her body physically changed. Okay? And what O'Keeffe is talking about here is about the eternal change, okay, what happens emotionally and hormonal, okay, and so here you have this one called Black Iris, and you can see the little fetus inside this kind of black orb, and then on the outside she's glowing, on the inside it's dark, okay, on same kind of idea behind Picasso's, okay? On the outside of the mirror, she's glowing, but on the inside, she's looking at herself and she's depressed and dark. But he's saying she's depressed because of how she once used to look, okay? And that's the idea of what a man would think that pregnancy does to the body, because he's using the woman as a sexual object and she's changed. And then here, O'Keeffe, she never had children, wanted to have children. And so here she's talking about that time when a woman gives birth, and in the process they have that postpartum depression and that depression where you look like you're glowing and everyone thinks that you're doing great, but the truth is that hormonally you're out of balance. And she's talking about that, and she's saying to Picasso, this is what's going on. And there was a huge fight between the two of them. And I believe O'Keeffe won, hands down. And there was a lot of backlash to Picasso on him fighting with O'Keeffe. And O'Keeffe was a no, beginner at that time, and to even fight with Picasso was kind of risky. I think doing it got her some notoriety, but at the same time, it could have really affected her career. And he definitely did some serious backlash towards her on that. So that's what this is about: postpartum depression and physical depression. Now, do some women get physical depression? Sure, okay, but majority of it's hormonal. Okay, and then of course I showed this piece again with the white iris. But here, okay, so let's go to where she moves to Santa Fe. Now, I pulled this piece up because this is one of her more famous pieces. This is one of the main churches in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I remember going to Santa Fe and my mom taking us to the back of the church and showing us the church. And she's like, George O'Keeffe stood right here and painted this church. And I was like 15, and I'm like, Mom, it's hot, and I don't care. And I just wanted to go inside because where it was cooler. And being 15, I can care less about the back of a church. But to my mom, this is kind of one of her pilgrimage places. Now, as you look at the next piece here, her work has changed. The flower color has changed. She's gotten older, and so she's basically kind of playing with that idea that the body changes, and so does the flowers change. Okay? And then you look over here, and she even eliminates that zoomed in portion of the flower, and she focuses more with the structure of the culture that she's being encompassed in Santa Fe. And so the work kind of did start to change at that point. So let's get into Frida Kahlo now. Now Frida, alright, super powerful woman. A lot of people love Frida's work, and if you have not seen the movie Frida, I'll be putting an image at the end of this section for her. Check it out. I think you really enjoy the movie Frida. Okay, so and then after this, I'm going to probably take make it into part 2 because we're getting to a minute or an hour and a half close to. Okay. So here, what Frida's about, her work, it typically deals with herself. Okay, self-portraits are what people generally are looking for in her work. Now, I'm only pulling out a handful of her pieces. There are some beautiful pieces of hers out there. She plays with the duality of the love for Diego Rivera. Okay, she also plays out her Spanish heritage, and she also plays with Catholicism and religion imagery that deals prominently in Mexican traditions. Now, she was injured, and here she is in bed. This is one of her older pictures. In her work, okay, she deals with also a lot of pain. Her injury, if you've not seen the movie or heard of her, her injury endured when she was taking a bus, and a trolley car ran into the bus. It flipped the bus over, and a rod popped out of the floorboard, and she fell into it when the bus flipped, and that rod went through her lower hip, through her reproductive female organ, okay, at the bottom, and then it bent with her and twisted up and went into the side of her hip, out her chest, and out and back into the collarbone, and it basically shish kebabbed her. Okay, that's the best way I can think about it. If you're going back in and out, they were able to remove the rod, and she was very much harmed, and it wasn't the stabbing part that harmed her the most. It was the pulling of the spine. It pulled every spine vertebrae apart, and all her discs got disaligned. Okay, they told her she may never walk again. A year and a half to 2 years later, she started taking her first steps. She had to use a cane for a long time, and later in her life, she definitely used that cane. But she went through tons and tons of therapy for her back, lots of casts, and a lot of painful procedures. And so her father was a photographer, and he encouraged her to do her art in bed while she was going through this therapy. After she got well, she went to go see Diego Rivera at the school she was going to at one point, and they decided that they would get married after a few months of courtship. The mother definitely did not want her to marry Diego because he'd been married 3 to 4 times, I believe. I think this is his 4th marriage. And he was a cheater. I know, looking at him with those high waist pants. Yes, I know. But he definitely cheated on most of his wives. And she was okay with that. But there was an issue, and I'll get into that. What ultimately separated them. Here is where the pieces started to fall apart for them as a relationship. Diego had a moment to have a mural put up, and he's a muralist in Rockefeller Center, and this is the only picture that we have of this piece because the Rockefellers destroyed it. And so this picture was taken and then shown to the public, and the public became outraged because it has Marxism and communist conversations in the mural, and Diego would not change the imagery because that's what he stood for, and in his mural he wanted to make that statement. And the Rockefellers said if you would have came out and told them what the image was going to be about, they would have supported it and given a lot of documentation behind it and allowed it to be done. But instead, he hid the fact that what he was doing and kind of snuck it in there. And everybody got upset, and so the Rockefellers just decided to pay him for the job, and they destroyed it. And destroying this also destroyed his whole career. But this is where it kind of gets interesting. Where his career falls apart, her career starts to grow. And while she was watching Diego paint, she would do little paintings on the side, and she started painting and making some famous pieces, or making some pieces that famous people would buy. But then when they got back home, in Diego's low, and her success started. Something happened between her sister and Diego, and they had an affair, and she caught him, and she immediately left him and moved to Paris. And so she did this whole idea of her liberation from Diego. And even here, you can kind of see in this picture. This is called Two Fridas, and this is when she's looking at her path, and she's like, if I would have gone one direction or gone the other direction, she's basically saying, if I didn't get on the bus, I wouldn't have had the accident. And so the image on the right is not getting on the bus, and she might have had a child. In the process of New York, also, she was carrying a child and lost it in the 3rd trimester. She does do a lot of artwork with her dead fetus child. It is really heart-wrenching. Just to let you know, if you do look up the research behind her art. The other piece you see here is her with the accident, wearing the dress that her mother wanted her to wear on her wedding day, and saying if she would have done that, would her life be different too? But no, she thinks it still would be the same outcome, and she cuts those ties. Okay, and she's cutting that blood off from her relationship to Diego. So it's a very powerful piece. One of her first pieces that she made as she left to go to Paris. Here she is with the Communist Party rally. If you notice, there's no other woman in this picture. It's all men. Women did not have voices, okay? And here she is, standing front and center and protesting just like all the rest of the men. Diego believed that she should because she was a powerful woman, and I agree. I think if you're that strong of a woman, sure, go out in front. But you got to understand, this is a Hispanic culture where women are not looked, especially at this time, with such high regard. As I Lie Dying is the title of this piece, and it's playing with the Mexican heritage again with Day of the Dead, and then here she's passed away, but her body is set up with fireworks to explode. She did a period about torture. If animals had faces, would you shoot them? And so that's what this piece is about. She also did a series, and I know I didn't put it in this lecture because it's such a gruesome picture, of a woman stabbed 22 times by a man, and so it's her, but instead of the woman, it's her being stabbed 22 times in bed, and the husband who stabbed the girl, or the woman, got a very light charge, and they asked, why did you do it? And he said, because she deserved it. And she believed no woman should be stabbed 22 times and deserve it. And so it's what that piece is about. When she moved to France, she wanted to try to get into the art scene and push herself as an artist, and so she cut off her hair and dressed in a suit and went up to the galleries as a man and saying she's stronger than any man's art that's out there. And they loved it. They loved the whole idea behind her. They loved the whole energy. And in Paris, she got a piece into the Louvre. Or the Salon, and it really opened a lot of doors for her, and she became one of the artists to look at. It took almost her whole entire life to have her own show in Mexico, and she was one of the first women in Mexico to have her own solo show, but it took her, having a show in Paris. It took her a show in America. It took her to all this time to get that one solo show in her home country. But when she's had solo shows throughout all these major venues, the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, and all these places were taking her work, but her own country, Mexico City, wouldn't even give her a show till almost the end of her life, which is just kind of shocking. Her and Diego did get back together at the end, but they never lived in the same house. They lived next door to each other. There's a bridge between one house to another. She said she loved him, but couldn't live with him. And I think that's where it's kind of interesting how they have their own house and their own life, but they needed each other. And here's one of her pieces where she's looking at you, and again she's playing with the Mexican heritage with the thorns around her neck, and she's also talking about the torture that she went through realigning her back. Now, if you've seen the movie Frida, it's a great movie. But if you've not, Netflix plays this on a regular basis. It's free for Netflix. I think it's also free on Amazon Prime. Sometimes YouTube will play it for a little bit, but then it cuts out, shuts it off after a while. If you get a chance to see it, take a moment and watch it. It's probably one of the better art documentaries that are out there. And so anyway, I highly recommend that you watch this film. I think you'll enjoy it. On that note, I'm going to be stopping here, okay, and I'll be doing a part 2. Okay, part 2 is going to be probably pretty short. All right, so we'll stop.